Hello. You'll have noticed that there's a growing awareness of the need for a good mental well-being. And in this recent situation, we've seen how people's well-being has been affected in various ways. And it's been interesting that a number of studies have shown that getting outside and being aware of the world around us can be very helpful. In fact, they've been saying that gardening has been actually prescribed to people who are struggling in this area. And they're talking about community gardens and other such projects where people can find relaxation and companionship, and just by doing jobs in the garden can be very, very helpful for them. And it's very interesting that this connection with the world around us, just noticing the birds singing, the creatures, the flowers, the trees, the bushes, fruit growing, all of these things can be very, very helpful for people. And I find that interesting because, that's where it all started, according to the Bible, that God put the first man and woman in a garden, and their job was to tend and cultivate it, and they found purpose and meaning in doing that. And here we are today, and we're saying that's a good thing and will affect people's well-being. So it's interesting, isn't it? But it seems to me that our Maker knows what we need. And just looking at how he has given us a wonderful world to enjoy and given us the ability and the knowledge of how to tend and cultivate it can be very helpful. And what we discover, if you go right back to the beginning of the Bible, you'll find that man was put in this garden, and there are things that are specifically mentioned. There's the river, trees, fruit, leaves mentioned. And that's where man's history starts, according to the Bible. Now, throughout the Bible, we have references to these things. And in one place, in the book of Psalms, right in the middle of the Bible, we're given this picture of a tree that's been planted by rivers of water that brings forth its fruit and talks about its leaves flourishing. It's a picture of someone whose well-being is flourishing. And you get it again in the book of Jeremiah, again as the picture of the tree that's by rivers of water that brings forth its fruit in its season. Now, if you fast forward right to the end of the Bible, the last book in the New Testament, the book of Revelation, and you look at the last two chapters, again, what we see is God is going to create new heavens and a new earth, and then it talks about the same things. It talks about a river. It talks about the tree of life. It talks about fruit. It talks about leaves that are there for healing purposes. And what the Bible tells us is that in God's new world, it's going to be one without defilement. It will be pure. It will be lovely. Everything will be in its rightful place. Now, sadly, our world is marked by evil, isn't it? It doesn't matter which country or culture you go to, we read of man's evil and the results of that. But God's new world is not going to be marked by evil. It's going to be marked by righteousness. And I guess the question that we need to ask is, how can we be a part of God's new world? How can we know that we're going to have a place there? Now, it should be no surprise, but following the theme, the turning point is in a garden. The turning point to this dilemma of how we can go from a world that has been wrecked and ruined to a world that is pure and perfect. The turning point happens in a garden. And you may know, but two of the eyewitness accounts of Jesus, they refer to this, and they refer to Jesus going to a garden. And in that garden, he prays a very specific prayer. He's praying with regards to the suffering that he's going to go through. And he says, "May it pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done." And here, for the first time, it is a man praying that God's will would be done and not his. Now, again, when we go right back to the beginning of the Bible, what we see is our first four parents. They said effectively, "Not your will, God, but my will. I want things my way. I want to be in charge." And sadly, that has passed down through every human generation, hasn't it? We see it in children. It's mine, belongs to me. And they want their way, not somebody else's. And we have to try and train them otherwise. And if we're honest, it's within all of us, isn't it? It stays with us. And it's not just in our earliest years that we say, "I want my way." But some die singing, "I did it my way." This proud, boastful, arrogant, "I did it my way." That selfishness that runs through every human heart. And we have to acknowledge we've all got it, haven't we? And here in the garden, Jesus prays, "Not my way, not my will, but your will be done." And then he goes to the cross and he suffers and dies on that cross. And he enters into the suffering that should be ours because of our selfishness, our going our own way. And he takes that on himself so that we can have the opportunity of a new start with God. And then we read how that Jesus dying publicly, but then he's taken down from the cross and he's buried in a garden tomb. It's interesting, isn't it? It's in a garden again. And it's there 3 days later when Mary is there weeping, hoping to go and pay her last respects, and the body's gone. And she refers to someone she thinks is the gardener, and she says, "Will you tell me where you've laid him?" And then he just simply calls her name. And Mary realizes it's the risen Jesus. He's come back to life in the garden, and he appears to her in this garden. And through the death and the coming back to life of Jesus, it means that we can have a place in God's new world where there is no defilement, where there is no pain and suffering and things that are wrong. Everything will be in its rightful place. And there we can know our eternal well-being. We can know what it is to know that sense of peace and safety and tranquility, and that everything is in its rightful place. Everything is fulfilled. That's a wonderful thing. And when we come to God and we say, God, not my way, but your way. Your will be done in my life. And when we turn to God and we say, God, please will you forgive me through what Jesus has done on the cross, through his resurrection from the dead. I want to be a part of that new world. I want to know that I'm right with you. Then we can know that sense of well-being in our life, even in the midst of a topsy-turvy, messed up world. But then we can also know that in the future we will have that eternal well-being with God. I hope you come to know and appreciate that for yourself. God bless.